In Defense of Women by H.L. Mencken, Section 4, Chapter 3, Marriage, Part 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. 17. Fundamental Motives. How successful such concealment may be is well displayed by the general acceptance of the notion that women are reluctant to enter into marriage, that they have to be persuaded to it by eloquence and pertinacity, and even by a sort of intimidation. The truth is that, in a world almost divested of intelligible idealism, and hence dominated by a senseless worship of the practical, marriage offers the best career that the average woman can reasonably aspire to, and, in the case of very many women, the only one that actually offers a livelihood. What is esteemed and valuable in our materialistic and unintelligent society is precisely that petty practical efficiency at which men are expert, and which serves them in place of free intelligence. A woman, save she show a masculine strain that verges upon the pathological, cannot help to challenge men in general in this department, but it is always open to her to exchange her sexual charm for a lion's share in the earnings of one man, and this is what she almost invariably tries to do. That is to say, she tries to get a husband, for getting a husband means, in a sense, enslaving an expert, and so covering up her own lack of expertness and escaping its consequences. Thereafter, she has at least one stout line of defense against the struggle for existence, in which the prospect of survival is chiefly based, not upon the talents that are typically hers, but upon those she typically lacks. Before the average woman succumbs in this struggle, some man or other must succumb first. Thus her craft converts her handicap into an advantage. In this security lies the most important of all benefits that a woman attains by marriage. It is, in fact, the most important benefit that the mind can imagine, for the whole effort of the human race under our industrial society is concentrated upon the attainment of it. But there are other benefits too. One of them is that increasing dignity which goes with an obvious success. The woman who has got herself a satisfactory husband, or even a highly imperfect husband, is regarded with respect by other women, and has contemptuous patronage for those who have failed to do likewise. Again, marriage offers her the only safe opportunity, considering the Levantine view of women as property which Christianity has preserved in our civilization, to obtain gratification for that powerful complex of instincts which we call the sexual, and, in particular, for the instinct of maternity. The woman who has not had a child remains incomplete, ill at ease, and more than a little ridiculous. She is in the position of a man who has never stood in battle. She has missed the most colossal experience of her sex. Moreover, a social odium goes with her loss. Other women regard her as a sort of permanent tyro, and treat her with ill-concealed disdain, and deride the very virtue which lies at the bottom of her experimental penury. There would seem to be, indeed, but small respect among women for virginity per se. They are against the woman who has got rid of hers outside marriage, not because they think she has lost anything intrinsically valuable, but because she has made a bad bargain, and one that materially diminishes the sentimental respect for virtue held by men, and hence one against the general advantage and well-being of the sex. In other words, it is a guild resentment that they feel, not a moral resentment. Women, in general, are not actively moral, nor, for that matter, noticeably modest. Every man, indeed, who is in wide practice among them is occasionally astounded and horrified to discover on some rainy afternoon an almost complete absence of modesty in some women of the highest respectability. But of all things that a woman gains by marriage, the most valuable is economic security. Such security, of course, is seldom absolute, but usually merely relative. The best provider among husbands may die without enough life insurance, or run off with some preposterous light of love, or become an invalid or insane, or step over the intangible and wavering line which separates business success from a prison cell. Again, a woman may be deceived. There are stray women who are credulous and sentimental, and stray men who are cunning. Yet again, a woman may make false deductions from evidence accurately before her, ineptly guessing that the clerk she marries today will be the head of the firm tomorrow, instead of merely the bookkeeper tomorrow. But on the whole, it must be plain that a woman, in marrying, usually obtains for herself a reasonably secure position in that station of life to which she is accustomed. She seeks a husband, not sentimentally, but realistically. She always gives thought to the economic situation. She seldom takes a chance if it is possible to avoid it. It is common for men to marry women who bring nothing to the joint capital of marriage save good looks and appearance of vivacity. It is almost unheard of for women to neglect more prosaic inquiries. Many a rich man, at least in America, marries his typist or the governess of his sister's children and is happy thereafter. But when a rare woman enters upon comparable marriage, she is commonly set down as insane, and the disaster that almost always ensues quickly confirms the diagnosis. The economic and social advantage that women thus seek in marriage, and the seeking is visible no less in the kitchen wench who aspires to the heart of a policeman than in the fashionable flapper who looks for a husband with a Rolls Royce, is, by a curious twist of fate, one of the underlying causes of the precarious economic condition before marriage rescues them. In a civilization which lays its greatest stress upon an uninspired and almost automatic expertness, and offers its highest reward to the more intricate forms thereof, they suffer the disadvantage of being less capable of it than men. Part of this disadvantage, as we have seen, is congenital. Their very intellectual enterprise makes it difficult for them to become the efficient machines that men are. But part of it is also due to the fact that, with marriage always before them, coloring their every vision of the future, and holding out a steady promise of swift and complete relief, they are under no such implacable pressure as men are to acquire the sordid arts that they revolt against. The time is too short and the incentive too feeble. Before the woman employee of 21 can master a tenth of the idiotic "knowledge" in the head of the male clerk of 30, or even convince herself that it is worth mastering, she has married the head of the establishment, or maybe the clerk himself, and so abandons the business. It is, indeed, not until a woman has definitively put away the hope of marriage, or at all events admitted the possibility that she may have to do soon or late, that she buckles down in earnest to whatever craft she practices, and makes a genuine effort to develop competence. No sane man, seeking a woman for a post requiring laborious training and unremitting diligence, would select a woman still definitely young and marriageable. To the contrary, he would choose either a woman so unattractive sexually as to be palpably incapable of snaring a man, or one so embittered by some catastrophe of amour as to be pathologically emptied of the normal aspirations of her sex. 18. The process of courtship. This bemusement of the typical woman by the notion of marriage has been noted as self-evident by every literate student of the phenomena of sex, from the early Christian fathers down to Nietzsche, Ellis, and Shaw. That it is denied by the current sentimentality of Christendom is surely no evidence against it. What we have in this denial, as I have said, is no more than a proof of women's talent for a high and sardonic form of comedy, and of man's infinite vanity. "I wooed and won her," says Sagrinel of his wife. "I made him run," says the hare of the hound. When the thing is maintained not as a mere windy sentimentality, but with some notion of carrying it logically, the result is invariably a display of parology so absurd that it becomes pathetic. Such nonsense one looks for in the works of gynophile theorists with no experience of the world, and there is where one finds it. It is almost always wedded to the astounding doctrine that sexual frigidity, already disposed of, is normal in the female, and that the approach of the male is made possible not by its melting into passion, but by a purely intellectual determination, inwardly revolting to avoid his ire by pandering to his gross appetites. Thus the thing is stated in a book called The Sexes in Science and History, by Eliza Burt Gamble, an American lady anthropologist. The beautiful coloring of male birds and fishes, and the various appendages acquired by males throughout the various orders below man, and which, so far as they themselves are concerned, serve no other useful purpose than to aid in securing the favors of the females, have by the latter been turned to account in the process of reproduction. The female made the male beautiful, that she might endure his caresses. The italics are mine. From this premise, the learned doctor proceeds to the classical sentimental argument that the male of all species, including man, are little more than chronic seducers, and that their chief energies are devoted to assaulting and breaking down the native reluctance of the aesthetic and anesthetic females. In her own words, quote, regarding males, outside of the instinct for self-preservation, which, by the way, is often overshadowed by their great sexual eagerness, no discriminating characters have been acquired and transmitted, italics, other than those which have been the result of passion, end italics, namely, pugnacity and perseverance, end quote. Again, the italics are mine. What we have here is merely the old delusion of masculine enterprise and amour, the concept of man as a lascivious monster and of woman as a shrinking victim. In brief, the Don Juan idea in a fresh bib and tucker. In such bilge lie the springs of many of the most vexatious delusions of the world, and of some of its lauded farce no less. It is thus that fatuous old maids are led to look under their beds for fabulous ravishers, and to cry out that they have been stabbed with hypodermic needles in cinema theaters, and to watch furtively for white slavers in railroad stations. It is thus, indeed, that the whole white slave mountebankery has been launched, with its gaudy fictions and preposterous alarms. And it is thus, more importantly, that whole regiments of neurotic wives have been convinced that their children are monuments, not to cooperation in which their own share was innocent and cordial, but to the solitary libidinous of their swinish and unconscionable husbands. Dr. Gamble, of course, is speaking of the lower fauna in the time of Noah. A literal application of her theory to man today is enough to bring it to a reductio ad absurdum. Which sex of the Homo sapiens actually does the primping and parading that she describes? Which runs to, quote, beautiful coloring, end quote, sartorial hirsute facial? Which encases itself in the vestments which, quote, serve no other useful purpose than to aid in securing the favors, end quote, of the other? The insecurity of the gifted savant's position is at once apparent. The more convincingly she argues that the primeval mud hens and the she mackerel had to be anesthetized with spectacular decorations in order to, quote, endure the caresses, end quote, of their beaux, the more she supports the thesis that men have to be decoyed and bamboozled into love today. In other words, her argument turns upon and destroys itself. Carried to its last implication, it holds that women are all Donna Juanitas, and that if they put off their millinery and cosmetics and abandon the shameless sexual allurements of their scanty dress, men could not, quote, endure their caresses, end quote. To be sure, Dr. Gamble by no means draws this disconcerting conclusion herself. To the contrary, she clings to the conventional theory that the human female of today is no more than the plaything of the concupiscent male, and that she must wait for the feminist millennium to set her free above his abominable pawings. But she can reach this notion only by standing her whole structure of reasoning on its head, in fact, by knocking it over and repudiating it. On the one hand, she argues that splendor of attire is merely a bait to overcome the reluctance of the opposite sex, and on the other hand, she argues, at least by fair inference, that it is not. This grotesque switching of horses, however, need not detain us. The facts are too plain to be disposed of by a lady anthropologist's theorizings. Those facts are supported in the field of animal behavior by the almost unanimous evidence of zoologists, including that of Dr. Gamble herself. They are supported in the field of human behavior by a body of observation and experience so colossal that it would be quite out of the question to dispose of it. Women, as I have shown, have a more delicate aesthetic sense than men. In a world wholly rid of men, they would probably still array themselves with vastly more care and thought of beauty than men would ever show in like case. But, with the world what it is, it must be obvious that their display of finery, to say nothing of their display of epidermis, has the conscious purpose of attracting the masculine eye. A normal woman, indeed, never so much as buys a pair of shoes or has her teeth plugged without considering, in the back of her mind, the effect upon some unsuspecting candidate for her, quote, reluctant, end quote, affections. 19. The actual husband. So far as I can make out, no woman of the sort worth hearing, that is, no woman of intelligence, humor, and charm, and hence of success in the duel of sex, has ever publicly denied this. The denial is confined entirely to the absurd sect of female bachelors of arts and to the generality of vain and unobservant men. The former, having failed to attract men by the devices described, take refuge behind the sour grapes doctrine that they have never tried, and the latter, having fallen victims, soothe their egoism by arrogating the whole agency to themselves, thus giving it a specious appearance of the volitional and even of the audacious. The average man is an almost incredible popinjay. He can think of himself only as the center of situations. All the sordid transactions of his life appear to him, and are depicted in his accounts of them as feats, successes, proofs of his acumen. He regards it as an almost magical exploit to operate a stockbroker's shop, or to get elected to public office, or to swindle his fellow knaves in some degrading commercial enterprise, or to profess some nonsense or other in college, or to write so platitudinous a book as this one. And in the same way, he views it as a great testimony to his prowess at amour to yield up his liberty, his property, and his soul to the first woman who, in despair of finding better game, turns her appraising eye upon him. But if you want to hear a mirthless laugh, just present this masculine theory to a bridesmaid at a wedding, particularly after alcohol and crocodile tears have done their disarming work upon her. That is to say, just hint to her that the bride harbored no notion of marriage until stormed into acquiescence by the moonstruck and impetuous bridegroom. I have used the phrase, quote, in despair of finding better game, end quote. What I mean is this, that not one woman in 100 ever marries her first choice among marriageable men. The first choice is almost invariably one who is beyond her talents, for reasons either fortuitous or intrinsic. Let us take, for example, a woman whose relative naivete makes the process clearly apparent, to wit, a simple shop girl. Her absolute first choice, perhaps, is not a living man at all, but a supernatural abstraction in a book, say, one of the heroes of Hal Caine, Ethel M. Dell, or Marie Corelli. After him comes a moving picture actor, then another moving picture actor, then perhaps many more, 10 or 15 head, then a sebaceous young clergyman, then the junior partner in the firm she works for, then a couple of department managers, then a clerk, then a young man with no definite profession or permanent job, one of the innumerable hosts which flits from post to post, always restive, always trying something new, perhaps a neighborhood garage keeper in the end. Well, the girl begins with the Cain Colossus. He vanishes into thin air. She proceeds to the moving picture actors. They are almost as far beyond her. And then to the man of God, the junior partner, the department manager, the clerk. One and all, they are carried off by girls of greater attractions and greater skills, girls who can cast gaudier flies. In the end, suddenly terrorized by the first faint shadows of spinsterhood, she turns to the ultimate numbskull and marries him out of hand. This, allowing for class modifications, is almost the normal history of a marriage, or more accurately, of the genesis of a marriage under Protestant Christianity. Under other rites, the business is taken out of the woman's hands, at least partly, and so she is less enterprising in her assembling of candidates and possibilities. But when the whole thing is left to her own heart, that is, to her head, it is but natural that she should seek a wider range of choice as the conditions of her life allow, and in a democratic society, those conditions put few, if any, fetters upon her fancy. The servant girl, or factory operative, or even prostitute of today may be the chorus girl or moving picture vampire of tomorrow and the millionaire's wife of next year. In America especially, men have no settled antipathy to such stooping alliances. In fact, it rather flatters their vanity to play Prince Charming to Cinderella. The result is that every normal American young woman, with the practicality of her sex and the inner confidence that goes therewith, raises her amorous eye as high as it will roll. And the second result is that every American man of presentable exterior and easy means is surrounded by an aura of discreet provocation. He cannot even dictate a letter or ask for a telephone number without being measured for his wedding coat. On the continent of Europe, and especially in the Latin countries where class barriers are more formidable, the situation differs materially, and to the disadvantage of the girl. If she makes an overture, it is an invitation to disaster. Her hope of lawful marriage by such means is almost nil. In consequence, The prudent and decent girl avoids such overtures, and they must be made by third parties or by the man himself. This is the explanation for the fact that a Frenchman, say, is habitually enterprising and immoral and hence bold and often offensive, whereas an American is what is called chivalrous. The American is chivalrous for the simple reason that the initiative is not in his hands. His chivalry is really a sort of coquetry. 20. The unattainable ideal. But here I rather depart from the point, which is this, that the average woman is not strategically capable of bringing down the most tempting game within her purview, and must thus content herself with a second, third, or nth choice. The only women who get their first choices are those who run in almost miraculous luck and those too stupid to formulate an ideal. Two very small classes, it must be obvious. A few women, true enough, are so pertinacious that they prefer defeat to compromise. That is to say, they prefer to put off marriage indefinitely rather than to marry beneath the highest leap of their fancy. But such women may be quickly dismissed as abnormal, and perhaps as downright diseased in mind. The average woman is well aware that marriage is far better for her than celibacy, even when it falls a good deal short of her primary hopes, and she is also well aware that the differences between man and man, once mere money is put aside, are so slight as to be practically almost negligible. Thus the average woman is under none of the common masculine illusions about elective affinities, soulmates, love at first sight, and such phantasms. She is quite ready to fall in love, as the phrase is, with any man who is plainly eligible, and she usually knows a good many more such men than one. Her primary demand in marriage is not for the agonies of romance, but for comfort and security. She is thus easier satisfied than a man, and oftener happy. One frequently hears of remarried widowers who continue to moon about their dead first wives, but for a remarried widow to show any such sentimentality would be a 9 days' wonder. Once replaced, a dead husband is expunged from the minutes, and so is a dead love. One of the results of all this is a subtle reinforcement of the contempt with which women normally regard their husbands, a contempt grounded, as I have shown, upon a sense of intellectual superiority. To this primary sense of superiority is now added the disparagement of a concrete comparison, and over all is an ineradicable resentment of the fact that such a comparison has been necessary. In other words, the typical husband is a second-rater, and no one is better aware of it than his wife. He is, taking averages, one who has been loved, as the saying goes, but by one woman, and then only as a second, third, or nth choice. If any other woman had ever loved him, as the idiom has it, she would have married him, and so have made him ineligible for his present happiness. But the average bachelor is a man who has been loved, so to speak, by many women, and is the lost first choice of at least some of them. He represents the unattainable and hence the admirable. The husband is the attained and disdained. Here we have sufficient explanation of the general superiority of bachelors, so often noted by students of mankind. A superiority so marked that it is difficult, in all history, to find 6 first-rate philosophers who were married men. The bachelor's very capacity to avoid marriage is no more than a proof of his relative freedom from the ordinary sentimentality of his sex. In other words, of his greater approximation to the clear-headedness of the enemy sex. He is able to defeat the enterprise of women because he brings to the business an equipment almost comparable to their own. Herbert Spencer, until he was 50, was ferociously harassed by women of all sorts. Among others, George Eliot tried very desperately to marry him. But after he had made it plain over a long series of years that he was prepared to resist marriage to the full extent of his military and naval power, the girls dropped off one by one, and so his last decades were full of peace, and he got a great deal of very important work done. End of Marriage, Part 1.